So picture this, it's the summer of 1947. One man with just a map and a pen draws a line. And that single line, it doesn't just create two new countries. It unleashes one of the greatest human tragedies of the 20th century. This is the story of how that line, drawn in just 5 weeks, led to unimaginable chaos, violence, and a legacy of division that still endures to this day.
To really get a feel for the scale of this catastrophe, we're not going to start with the high-level politics. No. We're going to start with a single, absolutely horrifying moment. What happened on one train, on one fateful day?
So on September 22, 1947, you have this train. It's packed with Muslim refugees trying to get from India to the brand new country of Pakistan. But near the city of Amritsar, it's attacked. And in that one attack, an estimated 3,000 people, men, women, and children, were killed. But what's truly chilling, is the almost clinical nature of what happened next. For 3 hours, it was just a scene of absolute slaughter. The British officer who was supposed to be in charge of the escort, he was killed, and get this, reportedly by his own men who just refused to fire on the attackers. And then the next day, the train was just returned to the station, a ghost train, literally filled with the dead. And look, this wasn't some isolated, one-off event. Not at all. The violence became this vicious, horrifying cycle. There were retaliatory attacks on trains carrying Hindus and Sikhs who were trying to get into India. The whole situation got so deadly that the government of Pakistan eventually had to stop all refugee trains coming from India and Punjab. They just realized there was almost no way to protect them.
So you have to ask yourself, how did this happen? How does a moment that's supposed to be about independence and freedom descend into this kind of chaos and bloodshed? Well, this violence wasn't random. It was the direct result of a political decision, made in a huge hurry, miles and miles away from the people whose lives it would completely shatter.
And the answer, well, it lies with a British lawyer who had, believe it or not, never even been to India before, and the impossible, absolutely impossible task he was given. So the border was called the Radcliffe Line, named after its chairman, Sir Cyril Radcliffe. And just try to wrap your head around the scale of his task, right? He had to divide 175,000 square miles of territory. That's bigger than most countries in Europe. It was home to 88 million people. And he was supposed to do it mainly based on religious majorities, while also somehow accounting for other factors like, irrigation systems and roads.
Okay, this timeline is absolutely key to understanding the chaos that followed. So Radcliffe, this guy who's never set foot in India, arrives on July 8th. He has just 5 weeks to draw this border. But here's the most astounding part, the real kicker. The final line wasn't even made public until 2 days after independence. Can you imagine? Millions of people celebrated their newfound freedom without having a clue which country they were actually living in.
So you might be wondering, how could a process this important go so spectacularly wrong so fast? Well, the truth is, it was practically designed for disaster right from the very start. You basically have this perfect storm of factors. First, the deadline, just 5 weeks. It's insane. Then the chairman, Radcliffe himself, zero local knowledge. He was chosen just because he was seen as neutral. The commission of Indian judges who were supposed to help, they were so politically deadlocked they could barely even speak to each other. So Radcliffe had to make all the final calls himself. And then, to top it all off, that decision to keep the border a secret, it meant that when the violence finally erupted, there were no police, no military, nobody on the new border to stop it.
And Radcliffe himself? He was absolutely miserable. He hated the heat, he was sick, and he was just desperate to leave. In his own words, he later said his greatest achievement was just a physical one, simply surviving the climate. And that rush, that desire to just get the job done and get out, had catastrophic, unthinkable consequences. He actually destroyed all his papers before he left India, and then refused to ever speak of it again.
So, this deeply flawed political process, it had a devastating human cost. And that tragedy, it was felt most acutely, most brutally, by women.
During the violence of the partition, it's estimated that somewhere between 75,000 and 100,000 women were abducted and raped. It's just a staggering number. Women's bodies literally became battlegrounds, a way for communities to terrorize and humiliate one another.
And, even the official numbers became a part of the conflict itself.
India came out with lists of 33,000 missing Hindu and Sikh women in Pakistan. Pakistan, in turn, estimated that 50,000 Muslim women had been abducted in India. The exact figures we'll probably never know. They're lost to history. But they all point to an immense and deeply gendered catastrophe.
And a lot of this violence was highly organized. It wasn't just random mobs. You had Sikh jathas, which were armed bands, sometimes getting help from the rulers of local princely states, carrying out these systematic attacks. But they weren't the only ones. Pathans from the frontier were known for abducting Hindu and Sikh women from trains. The bottom line is, on all sides, the authorities often just failed to protect the innocent.
And in the absolutely hellish logic of partition, every single atrocity was met with a reprisal. Horrific acts that were committed against Muslim women in a city like Amritsar were then mirrored by attacks on Hindu and Sikh women in Pakistani cities like Sialkot. It was a complete and total breakdown of humanity, fueled by nothing but revenge.
Eventually, this wave of violence did subside, but that line, the one drawn on the map, it created a legacy of conflict that is, believe it or not, still very much with us today.
And this had huge, lasting geopolitical consequences. Take the district of Gurdaspur, for example. It had a slight Muslim majority, so everyone assumed it would go to Pakistan. But at the last minute, Radcliffe awarded a really crucial part of it to India. Why? Well, it contained the headwaters of canals that were vital to the city of Amritsar. And, even more critically, it gave India its only road access to the disputed state of Jammu and Kashmir. That single decision basically set the stage for the decades of conflict we've seen in Kashmir ever since.
The Radcliffe Line was meant to solve a political problem, but in its unbelievable haste and ignorance, it created a human catastrophe of epic proportions. It really stands as this terrifying lesson in how borders, when they're drawn without any regard for the people they divide, can carve wounds so deep that they last for generations. And the question we're all left with is, can those wounds ever truly heal?